There's a monastery high in the mountains where monks live well into their 90s, some beyond 100. When I asked the master what they knew that the rest of us didn't, he smiled and said something that changed my understanding of aging forever. Most people spend their entire lives preparing to live, but never prepare to age with wisdom. They fear growing old because they've never learned how to grow deep. Today, I want to share with you 5 profound truths about life after 80 that no one talks about. Not the surface-level advice about staying active or eating well, but the deeper, more challenging realities that can either break your spirit or forge it into something unshakable. These aren't just observations, they're transformative insights that, when understood and embraced, can turn your 80s from a period of decline into a season of profound awakening. If you've ever wondered why some people seem to fade quietly after 80, while others radiate a kind of inner fire that seems to grow stronger with age, the answer lies in understanding these 5 truths. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll see aging not as something that happens to you, but as something you can master, like any other skill, with awareness, acceptance, and ancient wisdom. But first, let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. Are you preparing for your 80s the same way you prepared for your career, your marriage, or raising your children? Or are you hoping that somehow, magically, you'll figure it out when you get there? Because here's what the monks understand that most of us don't. The quality of your final decades isn't determined by luck, genetics, or circumstances. It's determined by how well you understand and prepare for the inner landscape of deep aging. Before we dive into these 5 truths, we need to understand something fundamental. In Eastern philosophy, there's a concept called the 3 stages of life. The first stage is learning, where we absorb knowledge, build skills, and establish ourselves in the world. The second stage is doing, where we apply what we've learned, build careers, raise families, and contribute to society. But the third stage, the stage that begins around 80, is different. It's the stage of being. This isn't about becoming passive or withdrawing from life. It's about transitioning from external achievement to internal mastery. It's about moving from doing many things to being deeply present with fewer things. It's about quality over quantity, depth over breadth, wisdom over knowledge. And yet, our society gives us no roadmap for this transition. We're told to stay active and keep busy, but no one teaches us how to age with the kind of inner strength that makes these final decades not just bearable but beautiful. The monks I mentioned earlier don't just live longer, they live with a quality of presence and peace that most people never achieve at any age. They understand something that Western culture has forgotten, that aging is not about managing decline, it's about discovering depths of human experience that are only accessible through the accumulated wisdom of many years lived consciously. Truth 1, the sacred solitude, when your circle naturally contracts. The first truth about life after 80 is perhaps the most misunderstood. Your social circle will shrink, and this isn't necessarily a tragedy. It can be a transformation. But let me explain what I mean, because this truth has layers that most people never explore. When you reach 80, people begin to disappear from your life. Not just through death, though that happens too, but through the natural ebb and flow of human energy and attention. Friends move to be closer to their children. Old colleagues retire into their own private worlds. Neighbors sell their homes and relocate. Even family members, though they love you, become absorbed in their own life challenges. Careers, marriages, children, health issues of their own. At first, this feels like abandonment. You might find yourself checking the phone more often, wondering why certain people haven't called. You might feel hurt when invitations stop coming, when your opinion isn't sought as often, when conversations happen around you rather than with you. The initial response is often to fight this contraction, to reach out more, to demand attention, to feel bitter about being forgotten. Think about it this way. Throughout your younger years, you were like a tree growing outward, extending branches in every direction, connecting with as many people and experiences as possible. This was necessary and beautiful. But after 80, you're entering a different season, one where the tree stops growing outward and starts growing deeper, sending roots down into soil that younger people can't access. I once knew a woman named Catherine, 83, who initially felt devastated when her longtime bridge group dissolved. 2 members had passed away, one moved to assisted living, and another developed dementia. Catherine told me, "I felt like I was disappearing too." But instead of trying to force new social connections or dwelling in loneliness, she began to explore what this solitude was offering her. For the first time in decades, Catherine had hours of uninterrupted silence. At first it felt empty, but gradually she began to notice things she'd never had time to observe before. The way light moved across her living room throughout the day, the sounds of birds that had always been there but drowned out by human conversation, the subtle rhythms of her own thoughts and feelings when they weren't constantly responding to other people's needs and demands. Catherine discovered what the mystics have always known, that solitude and loneliness are completely different experiences. Loneliness is feeling empty when you're alone. Solitude is feeling full when you're alone. And this fullness doesn't come automatically. It's cultivated through practice, through learning to be present with yourself in a way that most people never develop because they're too busy being present with everyone else. But this doesn't mean you become a hermit or stop caring about connection. Instead, you learn to connect more intentionally and more deeply. When Catherine did spend time with people, she was more present, more appreciative, more genuinely interested in their lives because she wasn't desperate for their attention or approval. She had learned to enjoy her own company, which made her better company for others. The shrinking circle after 80 also forces you to confront something most people avoid their entire lives: the relationship you have with yourself. When external stimulation decreases, you can no longer avoid the internal landscape. This is where many people struggle, because they've spent decades defining themselves through their relationships, their work, their activities. But after 80, you have the opportunity to discover who you are beyond all of these external identities. This is why some people become bitter and resentful in their 80s, while others seem to glow with inner peace. The bitter ones are fighting the natural contraction, trying to maintain the same level of external connection and stimulation they had in their 60s. The peaceful ones have learned to embrace the inward journey, to find richness in simplicity, to develop what I call the art of sacred solitude. Sacred solitude isn't about being alone, it's about being whole while alone. It's about developing such a rich inner life that you can be genuinely happy in your own company. And paradoxically, when you achieve this, you often find that people are drawn to you more than when you are desperately seeking their attention. But let me be clear. This transition isn't always smooth or easy. There will be days when the silence feels heavy, when you miss the energy and chaos of a fuller social life, when you wonder if you're becoming irrelevant. These feelings are normal and natural. The key is not to get stuck in them, but to see them as part of the transformation process. One practice that can help during this transition is what I call the daily dialogue. Instead of waiting for others to call or visit, have a meaningful conversation with yourself each day. This isn't talking to yourself in a crazy way. It's having an intentional, reflective conversation about your day, your thoughts, your feelings, your memories. You might do this while walking, while having your morning coffee, or before bed. The goal is to become as interested in your own inner world as you once were in other people's external worlds. Another practice is the appreciation inventory. Each day, identify one thing you appreciate about your current life that you couldn't have appreciated when you were younger and busier. Maybe it's the luxury of watching the sunrise without rushing to get ready for work. Maybe it's the freedom to read an entire book in one sitting without interruption. Maybe it's the deep satisfaction of finally having time to think your own thoughts without constantly responding to other people's demands. The first truth about life after 80 is that your social circle will contract, and this can be either a loss or a gift depending on how you approach it. When you fight the contraction, it becomes painful and diminishing. When you embrace it as an opportunity for deeper self-discovery and more intentional connection, it becomes transformative. Truth 2. The body as teacher, learning the language of limitation. The second truth about life after 80 is one that our youth-obsessed culture particularly struggles to accept. Your body will become your teacher in ways it never was before, and the lessons it offers, while sometimes difficult, can lead to profound wisdom about what it means to be human. Throughout most of your life, your body has been your servant. You told it to get up early, work late, lift heavy things, run fast, go without sleep, eat quickly, and generally perform according to your will and schedule. And for decades, it mostly complied. Sure, there were minor rebellions, headaches when you were stressed, colds when you pushed too hard, injuries when you were careless, but these were temporary setbacks. With rest, medicine, or time, your body would return to its obedient state. After 80, this relationship fundamentally changes. Your body stops being primarily a servant and becomes primarily a teacher. And like all great teachers, it doesn't just tell you what you want to hear, it tells you what you need to learn. The first lesson your body teaches you after 80 is about impermanence. The Buddhist concept of anicca, the truth that everything changes and nothing lasts forever, becomes viscerally real. The strength that seemed so solid, the energy that felt endless, the resilience that bounced you back from every setback. These are revealed to be temporary gifts rather than permanent possessions. This realization can be terrifying or liberating depending on how you approach it. If you fight impermanence, if you rage against every ache and limitation, if you measure your worth by your physical capabilities, then aging becomes a series of defeats. But if you learn to dance with impermanence, to find grace in limitation, to discover new sources of strength as old ones fade, then aging becomes a masterclass in adaptability and acceptance. I remember meeting a man named Robert, 86, who had been a marathon runner well into his 70s. When I met him, he was using a walker and could barely make it around the block. I expected him to be bitter or depressed, but instead, he seemed remarkably peaceful. When I asked him about the transition, he said something that stuck with me. Running taught me about pushing limits. Walking teaches me about respecting them. Both are valuable lessons, but walking might be the more important one. Robert had learned what your body tries to teach you after 80, that there's profound wisdom in knowing when to push and when to yield, when to strive and when to rest, when to act and when to be still. This isn't about giving up or becoming passive. It's about developing what the martial arts call intelligent strength, the ability to use exactly the right amount of energy for each situation, no more and no less. The second lesson your body teaches you after 80 is about presence. When you're young and healthy, you can live largely in your head, thinking about the past and future while barely noticing your physical experience in the present moment. But after 80, your body demands more attention. It requires you to notice how you're feeling, to pay attention to signals of fatigue or discomfort, to be present with your physical experience in a way that younger people rarely are. This forced presence, while sometimes uncomfortable, can be profoundly grounding. It pulls you out of mental loops of worry and regret and anchors you in the immediate reality of being alive in this moment. Your body becomes a mindfulness teacher, constantly calling you back to the present through sensations that can't be ignored. But perhaps the most important lesson your body teaches you after 80 is about interdependence. The fierce independence that served you well in your younger years gradually gives way to an understanding that all beings are interconnected and that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a recognition of reality. This lesson often comes gradually and can be humbling. You might start by needing reading glasses, then help opening jars, then assistance with grocery shopping, then support with more personal tasks. Each stage can feel like a loss of dignity if you're still operating from the paradigm that worth equals independence. But if you can shift your perspective, each stage becomes an opportunity to practice grace, gratitude, and the art of receiving. In many traditional cultures, elders are revered partly because they've learned to embody wisdom through their physical limitations. They understand something that younger people haven't had the chance to learn, that the human experience includes vulnerability, that strength sometimes means acknowledging weakness, and that the most profound courage often involves accepting help with dignity rather than struggling alone with pride. The physical changes after 80 also teach you about what really matters. When energy becomes more precious, you naturally become more selective about how you spend it. Activities and relationships that once seemed important might fall away, while others gain new significance. This isn't about becoming inactive or disengaged, it's about becoming more intentional and focused. I knew a woman named Eleanor, 84, who had been a compulsive volunteer, involved in dozens of organizations and activities. After a series of health challenges forced her to cut back, she initially felt guilty and useless. But gradually, she realized that by focusing her limited energy on just 2 causes she truly cared about, she was actually making a more meaningful contribution than when she spread herself thin across many activities. Your body after 80 also teaches you about the difference between healing and curing. In your younger years, most health problems could be fixed. You got sick, you took medicine, you got better. After 80, you encounter more conditions that can be managed but not cured, accommodated but not eliminated. This teaches you about living with uncertainty, finding peace despite discomfort, and discovering wellness that isn't dependent on perfect health. This shift from curing to healing is profound. Curing focuses on eliminating symptoms and returning to a previous state. Healing focuses on integrating challenges and moving toward wholeness despite imperfections. Your body after 80 becomes a teacher of healing, showing you how to be well even when you're not completely healthy, how to find strength even when you're not completely strong. Some practical ways to embrace your body as teacher after 80 include developing a morning routine that honors your energy levels rather than fighting them, learning to rest before you're exhausted rather than pushing through fatigue, and finding movement practices that feel nourishing rather than punishing. It means eating foods that support your body's current needs rather than clinging to eating patterns from your younger years that no longer serve you. It also means redefining strength. Physical strength might decrease, but emotional strength, spiritual strength, and the strength that comes from wisdom and experience can continue to grow throughout your 80s and beyond. The body teaches you that there are many kinds of power, and the kind that matters most isn't always the kind that shows. Your body after 80 becomes a daily reminder of what the ancient philosophers knew, that we are not just minds temporarily housed in physical forms, but integrated beings whose physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects are deeply interconnected. The changes in your body create opportunities for growth in other dimensions of your being that might never have developed if everything remained static. The second truth about life after 80 is that your body will become your teacher, and the curriculum it offers, while sometimes challenging, can lead to profound wisdom about impermanence, presence, interdependence, and what it truly means to be human. The quality of this education depends entirely on how willing you are to be a student rather than fighting to remain the teacher. Truth. 3. The art of sacred receiving, redefining independence through interdependence. The third truth about life after 80 challenges one of the most deeply held values in our culture: the belief that independence equals worth and that needing help diminishes your dignity. This truth is perhaps the most difficult for many people to accept, especially those who have spent their lives being the helpers, the providers, the ones others relied upon. But understanding and embracing this truth can transform what feels like loss into profound spiritual growth. Let me start with a story that illustrates this transformation. There was once a successful businessman named Harold who had built a company from nothing, employed hundreds of people, and prided himself on never asking anyone for anything he couldn't provide for himself. At 82, after a series of small strokes, Harold found himself needing help with tasks he'd performed automatically for decades: buttoning shirts, managing his finances, even remembering to take his medications. But then something shifted. Harold's daughter, instead of arguing with his resistance, said something that changed his perspective. "Dad, you taught me that leadership means knowing when to delegate. You taught me that wisdom means using all available resources to achieve the best outcome. You taught me that love means letting people contribute their gifts. Why won't you let us apply the lessons you taught us?" This reframe helped Harold understand that accepting help wasn't a betrayal of his values. It was an application of them. He began to see that his resistance to receiving assistance was actually a form of selfishness, preventing others from experiencing the joy and meaning that comes from giving. He realized that by insisting on struggling alone, he was depriving his loved ones of the opportunity to express their care and gratitude for all he had given them throughout his life. This shift from seeing help as diminishment to seeing it as sacred exchange is one of the most important transitions you can make after 80, but it requires understanding several key principles that our culture rarely teaches. The first principle is that independence and interdependence are not opposites. They're different stages of the same journey. True independence was never about doing everything alone. It was about having the resources, skills, and confidence to navigate life's challenges. After 80, this might mean having the wisdom to recognize when you need support and the grace to accept it skillfully. In many indigenous cultures, elders are honored not despite their need for care, but because of their willingness to receive it gracefully. They understand that accepting help is a way of teaching younger generations how to give, how to serve, and how to prepare for their own eventual need for support. The elder who receives care with dignity and gratitude is modeling something essential about the human experience, that we all need each other, and that this need is not a weakness but a fundamental truth about being human. The second principle is that there are many ways to give, and receiving gracefully is itself a form of giving. When you allow someone to help you, you're giving them the opportunity to feel useful, to express their love, to practice compassion, and to develop skills they'll need as they age. You're giving them the gift of purpose and connection. I remember visiting a nursing home where I met a woman named Dolores, 89, who had been a teacher for 40 years. Even though she now needed help with daily tasks, she had found ways to continue giving. She listened to the stories of the younger staff members, offered encouragement to other residents who were struggling, and shared wisdom from her decades of experience with anyone who was interested. She understood that giving and receiving could happen simultaneously, and that her willingness to accept physical help made space for her to offer emotional and spiritual support. The third principle is that the resistance to receiving help often comes from confusion about where your true worth lies. If you believe your value comes from what you can do, then losing the ability to do certain things feels like losing your value. But if you understand that your worth comes from who you are, your character, your love, your presence, your accumulated wisdom, then accepting help with certain tasks doesn't diminish you at all. This is where the concept of dignity becomes crucial. Dignity isn't about being able to do everything yourself. It's about maintaining your sense of self-worth and self-respect regardless of your circumstances. You can accept help with walking while maintaining your dignity. You can need assistance with financial management while preserving your dignity. You can require care with personal tasks while keeping your dignity intact. But maintaining dignity while receiving help requires skill and practice. It means learning to express gratitude without excessive apologizing. It means setting boundaries around what kind of help you want and how you want to receive it. It means finding ways to contribute even when you're in a receiving mode. It means accepting assistance gracefully without becoming passive or demanding. The transformation from giver to receiver also offers unique opportunities for spiritual growth. Many of the world's wisdom traditions teach that learning to receive is actually more challenging than learning to give, and that mastering both is essential for spiritual maturity. When you're always in the giving role, you can maintain the illusion of control and self-sufficiency. When you must receive, you're forced to confront your vulnerability and interdependence, which can be humbling but also liberating. Buddhism teaches about the hungry ghost, a being with an enormous appetite but a tiny mouth, symbolizing the person who needs much but can receive little. Many people enter their 80s as emotional hungry ghosts, desperately needing help and care, but unable to receive it gracefully because they've never learned how. Learning to receive becomes a spiritual practice, a way of opening your heart not just to what others can give you, but to the fundamental interconnectedness of all life. The practical aspects of learning to receive after 80 involve several important skills. First is the ability to ask for help clearly and specifically. Instead of suffering in silence or making vague complaints, you learn to identify exactly what you need and communicate it directly. This isn't demanding or entitled, it's honest and practical. Third is finding ways to maintain reciprocity even when the traditional forms of giving and receiving have shifted. Maybe you can't cook dinner for your family anymore, but you can share family stories that preserve important memories. Maybe you can't provide financial support, but you can offer emotional support and wisdom. Maybe you can't help with physical tasks, but you can contribute your presence, your attention, and your love. The art of sacred receiving also involves learning to distinguish between help that preserves your autonomy and help that undermines it. Good help empowers you to do as much as possible for yourself while providing support where you truly need it. Poor help creates unnecessary dependence and takes away your agency. Learning to advocate for the kind of help that serves your highest good is an important skill. This might mean having conversations with family members or caregivers about your preferences, your boundaries, and your goals. It might mean accepting help with mobility while insisting on making your own decisions about how to spend your time. It might mean receiving assistance with household tasks while maintaining control over your living environment. The transformation from primary giver to skilled receiver can actually enhance your relationships rather than diminishing them. When you allow others to care for you, you often discover depths of love and commitment you didn't know existed. You might find that accepting help creates intimacy and connection that wasn't possible when you were always the strong one, the provider, the one who had everything together. Many people discover that some of their most meaningful relationships develop or deepen after 80, precisely because the barriers created by their need to be completely self-sufficient have been removed. When you can be vulnerable, others can be truly intimate. When you can receive care, others can express their deepest love. The third truth about life after 80 is that learning to receive help gracefully isn't a sign of decline. It's a master class in what it means to be human. It teaches you about humility without humiliation, vulnerability without victimhood, and interdependence as a source of strength rather than weakness. The elder who has mastered the art of sacred receiving often becomes more powerful, not less, because they've learned to access not just their own resources, but the resources of their entire community. Truth 4. The invisible presence, claiming your space in a youth-obsessed world. The fourth truth about life after 80 is perhaps the most infuriating and yet potentially the most liberating. You will become increasingly invisible to a world obsessed with youth, productivity, and speed. But this invisibility, while initially painful, can become a source of unexpected power and freedom if you understand how to work with it rather than against it. Let me explain what I mean by invisibility after 80. It's not that people can't physically see you, it's that they often see through you, around you, or past you to focus on what they consider more urgent or relevant. The cashier looks over your shoulder to the person behind you. The doctor addresses your adult child instead of speaking directly to you. The server assumes you can't hear or understand complex questions. People talk about you in your presence as if you're not fully there. This experience is jarring for many reasons, but perhaps most because it contradicts everything you know about your own inner life. Inside, you feel as aware, as interested, as engaged as ever. Your thoughts are clear, your opinions are formed, your emotions are vibrant. Yet the external world treats you as if you're somehow less present, less capable, less worthy of direct engagement than you were at 60 or 70. The initial response to this invisibility is often anger, hurt, or desperate attempts to demand attention. You might find yourself speaking louder, interrupting more, or becoming increasingly frustrated with a world that seems to have forgotten you exist. These responses are natural and understandable, but they rarely achieve the desired result and often reinforce the stereotypes that created the invisibility in the first place. But what if I told you that this invisibility, properly understood and skillfully navigated, could become one of your greatest assets after 80? What if the world's tendency to overlook you could be transformed into a kind of superpower? In ancient Chinese philosophy, there's a concept called the power of Wu Wei, achieving goals through non-action, or succeeding by not trying to succeed in conventional ways. The invisibility of advanced age can be understood as an involuntary introduction to this principle. When the world stops expecting you to perform, compete, or conform to external standards. You're free to operate according to entirely different rules. Let me share the story of Margaret, 85, who discovered this accidentally. Margaret had been a high-powered attorney, accustomed to commanding attention and respect in every room she entered. After retirement, she found herself increasingly frustrated by being overlooked, interrupted, or dismissed. At first, she fought this treatment, becoming more assertive and demanding in her attempts to be heard. But then something interesting happened. During a city council meeting about a proposed development in her neighborhood, Margaret noticed that while the younger speakers were carefully monitored and their time was strictly limited, no one was paying much attention to her. She realized she could speak longer, say more controversial things, and challenge authority figures in ways that would have been impossible if she were seen as a significant threat. Margaret began to experiment with what she called invisible influence. Instead of demanding attention directly, she learned to work behind the scenes, building coalitions among other overlooked community members, gathering information that others missed, and using her perceived harmlessness to access people and situations that were closed to more obvious power players. Within a year, Margaret had become one of the most effective community advocates in her city, precisely because she had learned to work with her invisibility rather than against it. She understood something that most people never discover, that being underestimated can be more powerful than being feared, and that influence often grows stronger when it's not immediately visible. This transformation from visible authority to invisible influence represents a fundamental shift in how power works after 80. Throughout most of your life, power comes from external recognition: titles, positions, wealth, physical strength, social connections. After 80, these sources of power often diminish, but new sources can emerge if you know how to cultivate them. The first source of invisible power is what I call the authority of experience. While the world might not immediately recognize your expertise, you possess something that younger people lack: the perspective that comes from having lived through multiple cycles of change, crisis, and recovery. You've seen patterns that others haven't noticed, witnessed consequences that others can't imagine, and developed wisdom that can't be learned from books or schools. This experiential authority doesn't always announce itself loudly, but it can be profoundly influential when applied skillfully. You might not be the most obvious leader in a group, but your questions can redirect entire conversations. Your stories can illustrate points that arguments can't make. Your calm presence can stabilize situations that others find chaotic. The second source of invisible power is freedom from many of the constraints that limit younger people. You're no longer building a career so you can speak truths that others can't afford to voice. You're not establishing social status so you can associate with people across all social boundaries. You're not accumulating wealth so you can take positions based on principle rather than profit. This freedom can be both liberating and responsibility generating. With less to lose, you can take risks that others can't take. With less to prove, you can focus on what genuinely matters rather than what looks impressive. With less time remaining, you can prioritize authenticity over approval. I knew a man named Frank, 87, who had spent his career as a middle manager, never speaking up in meetings, always deferring to higher authority. After retirement, he joined a community organization focused on affordable housing. To everyone's surprise, Frank became the group's most effective spokesperson, not because he was the most eloquent, but because his obvious sincerity and lack of personal agenda made him incredibly credible. Frank had discovered what many people learn after 80, that authenticity can be more powerful than charisma, and that people often trust those who clearly have nothing to gain from being trusted. His invisibility in terms of conventional markers of success made his moral authority more visible and more compelling. The third source of invisible power is what I call the sanctuary effect. Because you're not seen as a threat or competitor, people often feel safe sharing things with you that they wouldn't tell others. You become a repository of information, emotions, and confessions that can give you unique insight into situations and relationships. This doesn't mean becoming a gossip or manipulator, but rather understanding that your perceived harmlessness can make you a valuable confidant and advisor. People might tell you their real fears about a community issue, their honest assessment of a family situation, or their genuine concerns about a business decision. This information, used wisely and ethically, can help you influence outcomes in positive ways. But claiming your space in an ageist world requires more than just understanding invisible power. It also requires direct strategies for maintaining your visibility when you choose to be seen. This means learning when to insist on being heard and when to work quietly behind the scenes. Sometimes visibility requires what I call strategic disruption. Politely but firmly interrupting conversations that exclude you, redirecting attention when you're being talked over, or simply refusing to accept dismissive treatment. This isn't about being difficult or demanding, but about maintaining your dignity and your right to participate in your own life. Other times, visibility requires what I call valuable contribution, offering something so useful, insightful, or meaningful that people have to acknowledge your presence. This might be sharing a relevant story, asking a clarifying question, providing historical context, or offering a solution that others haven't considered. The key is learning to read situations accurately and respond appropriately. Some contexts require you to fight for visibility, while others allow you to work effectively from an invisible position. Some people need to be educated about their ageist assumptions, while others will never change and need to be worked around rather than confronted directly. The invisible presence after 80 also offers opportunities for what I call stealth mentoring. Because you're not seen as threatening or competitive, younger people might be more open to learning from you than they would be from peers who represent potential rivals. You can teach, guide, and influence in ways that don't trigger defensive responses. This might happen through casual conversations, shared activities, or simply modeling behavior that others find intriguing. Your calmness in stressful situations might inspire others to develop similar equanimity. Your contentment with simple pleasures might help others question their own frantic pursuit of external achievements. Your willingness to be vulnerable might give others permission to be more authentic. But perhaps the most important aspect of the fourth truth is learning to separate your self-worth from others' recognition of your worth. The invisibility after 80 can be painful precisely because we've been conditioned to measure our value by external validation. When that validation decreases, we might assume our worth has decreased as well. But this is the perfect opportunity to develop what the Stoic philosophers called internal scorecard, a way of measuring your worth based on your own values and standards rather than others' opinions and attention. When you no longer need external recognition to feel valuable, you become truly free to act according to your authentic self rather than according to what will gain approval. The fourth truth about life after 80 is that becoming invisible to a youth-obsessed world can be either a source of pain or a source of power, depending on how you understand and navigate it. When you learn to work with invisibility rather than against it, you can discover forms of influence and freedom that weren't available to you when you were more obviously powerful. The key is claiming your space, not by demanding attention, but by understanding that true presence doesn't depend on others' recognition. It depends on your own clarity about who you are and what you're here to contribute. Truth 5. The alchemy of regret. Transforming what was into wisdom for what is. The fifth and perhaps most profound truth about life after 80 is that you will be visited by regret in ways you never experienced before. But these visits, if met with wisdom rather than resistance, can become the raw material for your greatest transformation. This isn't about the small regrets of daily life, but about the deep existential reckonings that come when you have more past than future and the luxury of time to truly examine the life you've lived. After 80, regret often arrives quietly but persistently. It might come during those long afternoons when the house,